In the summer of 1943, Germany and the Soviet Union clashed in what is often regarded as the largest single battle in human history, the Battle of Kursk. Millions of soldiers, along with thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, faced off in a titanic confrontation. The German army aimed to strike such a devastating blow that the Red Army would be unable to launch another offensive. And indeed, new research indicates that Soviet losses were staggering, as much as 6 times greater in manpower and equipment. Yet, despite these enormous Soviet casualties, Germany still lost this monumental battle. By the spring of 1943, Nazi Germany's leadership was trapped in a strategic dilemma. The Soviet advance had been halted at Stalingrad, Allied bombers were devastating German cities, Axis troops in North Africa had surrendered, and the Allies were winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Adolf Hitler and his generals knew that victory over the Soviet Union was impossible while fighting on multiple fronts, so he grew cautious. This year, we cannot undertake any large operation in the East. We must avoid all risks. I think we can only make limited strikes. Sidat Tuple 21. Hitler believed that once the Anglo-Americans failed to open a second front in France, he could then deliver a decisive blow to the USSR. His immediate objective was to draw the Red Army into a war of attrition and cripple it, so severely that it would be incapable of launching a major offensive in 1943. This was crucial because by spring, Soviet forces outnumbered the Wehrmacht in the east by 2.1 to 1 in men, 4.6 to 1 in tanks, and 3.1 to 1 in artillery. Despite the devastating losses of 1941 to 42, the Red Army was preparing large-scale offensives. Soviet planners aimed to destroy German forces near Oryol, opening the road to Bryansk, Minsk, Poland, and East Prussia. A simultaneous thrust through Kharkiv would retake Poltava and Kyiv, while threatening German positions in the north and their Axis allies in Hungary and Romania. If successful, these operations could end the war by 1944. Thus, while the Germans settled on a cautious strategy for summer 1943, the Soviets dreamed of sweeping victories. Both sides focused their attention on the region around the city of Kursk. The Soviet General Staff, or Stavka, correctly anticipated that the Germans would strike the prominent Kursk salient. They deployed 2 major formations there, the Central Front under Konstantin Rokossovsky and the Voronezh Front under Nikolai Vatutin, and held the steppe military district under Ivan Konev in reserve for a counterattack. Soviet engineers transformed the salient into a vast fortress designed to grind down the attacking Germans. Yet doubts arose among Soviet leaders about the defensive plan as delays plagued fortification efforts. Stalin and Vatutin urged a preemptive strike to spoil the German offensive, but Marshals Vasilevsky and Zhukov persuaded Stalin to remain on the defensive first, bleed German armor, and only then counterattack, particularly in light of the new German heavy Tiger tanks. The Red Army had captured a Tiger in January 1943, discovering its formidable armor. Ordinary soldiers feared it too. The Germans have overtaken us again with their tanks. The worst is that our guns and tanks can't match the Tiger. Popgel 157. Soviet anti-tank crews trained to hit weak points such as vision slits and commanders' hatches, which could shear off when struck. To hold the line, the Soviets constructed 6 defensive belts around the salient, spanning over 9,200 kilometers of trenches, sometimes 4 lines deep, and laid about 1 million mines. Nearly 300,000 civilians, mostly women, worked tirelessly on these defenses. The first 2 belts were the strongest, forming dense anti-tank zones. A typical strongpoint contained anti-tank rifle squads, engineers with explosives, 4 to 10. Anti-tank guns and 2 or 3 tanks or self-propelled guns, often dug in so that only their turrets showed. German reconnaissance aircraft soon spotted many of these strongpoints. Wehrmacht Command issued new tactical instructions. The numerous anti-tank strongpoints visible in aerial photographs must be engaged as follows. A. Stuka dive. Bomber attack, followed immediately by grenadiers with fire support from Tigers. B. Strong points are to be suppressed by artillery and Tiger gunfire, then the infantry attack, followed by supporting tanks. Stadler 27. Beyond fortifications, artillery formed the backbone of Soviet defense. In some sectors, up to 70 guns covered each kilometer of front. Partisans operating behind German lines added to the pressure, carrying out 1D-100 attacks in June alone that damaged 400 locomotives and destroyed 54 railway bridges. Meanwhile, the Soviets also planned massive counteroffensives. Operation Kutuzov, involving the Western, Bryansk, and Central fronts, would strike the German-held Oryol salient, while Operations Rumiantsev, led by the Voronezh, Steppe, and Southwest fronts, would advance on Kharkiv. So, as the Red Army prepared both to repel and to strike back, Hitler deliberated where to attack. Initially, he favored the Donbass region to secure vital resources, but his generals persuaded him to focus on Kursk to cripple Soviet offensive potential. Contrary to post-war claims, Hitler was not the primary architect of the plan. Repeated delays plagued the operation. In April, General Walter Model of the Ninth Army assured Hitler he could win at Kursk, but lacked sufficient strength, so Hitler postponed the assault for reinforcements. Then, after Axis defeat in North Africa, he feared Italy might defect or the Allies might invade the Mediterranean. Heavy spring rains soon turned Soviet roads to mud, forcing further delays. By June, preparations were complete, yet Hitler remained uncertain. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein and General Kurt Zeitzler warned that Soviet defenses were growing stronger by the day. Hitler hesitated, even considering waiting for a Soviet attack. Finally, Army Group Center's Günther von Kluge convinced him to act quickly. Operation Citadel was scheduled for July 5, 1943. The German plan aimed to encircle and annihilate Soviet forces. Model's Ninth Army would smash through northern defenses in 2 days, while General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment, Kempf advanced from the south to complete the encirclement. Together with reserves, the Germans fielded about 900,000 men, 3,900 tanks and self-propelled guns, 1,800 aircraft, and 8,300 artillery pieces, tuple 80, though this included the Second Army, which would not participate. However, the plan suffered. From a fatal flaw, the Germans gravely underestimated the strength of the Red Army. The Red Army fields an enormous force, 2.6 million men, 8,900 tanks and self-propelled guns, 5,900 aircraft, and 4,400 artillery pieces and mortars, all ready to be unleashed in the coming clash. They also deploy new heavy weapons, such as the Su-122 and Su-152 self-propelled guns, adding to their already formidable arsenal. By this point, the Germans have finally settled on their target, Kursk, exactly where the Soviets have spent months preparing for an attack. Yet when the fighting begins, the Red Army is met with an unexpected twist. During the night of July 4-5, several German soldiers crossed the front lines to surrender, warning Soviet commanders that the long-awaited assault is imminent. Soviet artillery and aircraft immediately opened fire, hoping to catch the Germans massing in their assembly areas. General Rokossovsky later recalled the scene. "Our artillery fire plastered the enemy troops preparing to attack, caused heavy losses, especially among their artillery, and disrupted their command systems. Our strike surprised the fascists and made them think we were about to attack. Their plans were disrupted and confusion spread among the German soldiers. It took 2 hours before the enemy artillery began its preparatory fire, which was disorganized and weak." Rokossovsky 262. For decades, historians in both the Soviet Union and the West accepted this version of events, but modern research tells a different story. In truth, the Soviet barrage opened too early and inflicted little real damage, while German fighter aircraft destroyed roughly 300 Soviet planes on the first day alone. When the German ground offensive began on July 5th, their forces smashed through the first defensive belt in both the northern and southern sectors, By the following day, they had penetrated the second line as well, a devastating shock to Soviet commanders who had believed their elaborate defenses would hold far longer. Both the Central and Voronezh fronts rushed reinforcements to the front, but a major counterattack in the north failed to dislodge the advancing Germans. Rokossovsky then issued a crucial order. Given the superiority of the enemy, especially in heavy tanks, our tanks should only counterattack infantry or light vehicles, and only after our fire has already disorganized their formations. This order was necessary under the circumstances. There were cases when our tankers rushed to attack Tigers, only to be thrown back behind the infantry with heavy losses. Rokossovsky 266. In the south, Soviet counterattacks escalated into massive tank battles as they tried to encircle the German spearhead. But here, too, the German panzers held the upper hand. On July 8th alone, they destroyed 343 Soviet tanks and self-propelled guns while losing only 20 of their own. The Soviets had spent valuable reserves with little to show for it, and German forces continued their advance. Meanwhile, in the north, Model's Ninth Army began to falter as it reached the third defensive belt. Soviet minefields, some reinforced with artillery shells, disabled numerous German vehicles, while relentless Red Army artillery pinned down the infantry. German reports also noted that Soviet tactics against their heavy tanks were proving alarmingly effective. Particularly noticeable was that the commander's hatch was often pierced or badly damaged. Russian instructions for engaging Tigers were developed with surprising speed, and the enemy stubbornly followed them with every available weapon. Tuppel 65. Field Marshal von Klug attributed the Ninth Army's difficulties directly to the sheer power of Soviet fire, though he still hoped to renew the offensive after regrouping. Yet, even among elite German formations, coordination issues persisted, as seen during the 33rd Panzer Grenadier Regiment's assault on a fortified hill. The tanks of the 35th Panzer Regiment should have, as planned, immediately pushed to the crest of the hill. Our attack came under intense enemy fire, some of it from the flanks, yet we advanced better than expected. Once on the crest, however, brutal hand-to-hand combat broke out. The Russians had to be dragged from every foxhole. Unfortunately, our tanks remained at the base of the hill and didn't move forward. While the summit was being cleared, Russian tanks counterattacked. The last of our rifle companies saw that our own tanks were not supporting us and were unable to withstand the counterattack. Tuppel. Größte Schlacht 145. In the south, the 4th Panzer Army achieved greater success, breaking through the 3rd Soviet defensive belt on July 11th. By July 13th, Manstein conceded that his troops lacked the strength to encircle the Red Army on their own, though he still wanted the offensive to continue. Hitler, eager to avoid another argument with his defiant field marshal, claimed that Army Group South would need to transfer forces to counter the Allied landings in Sicily. In truth, this was merely a pretext. Not a single division was redeployed from the Eastern Front to Sicily for another 10 days. Nevertheless, the deception worked, and Manstein reluctantly agreed that Operation Citadel had failed. Hitler's excuse, however, endured as one of the most persistent myths surrounding the Battle of Kursk. Still repeated by some historians today, the German offensive collapsed under the weight of insufficient forces, fierce Soviet resistance, and the onset of the Red Army's counterattack. On July 12th, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov, breaking through the German lines near Oryol. The Ninth Army was forced to divert reinforcements to plug the gaps, sealing the fate of Citadel once and for all. Red Army soldier Evgeny Besanov later described the ferocity of the Luftwaffe's response. That was my first experience of such a heavy air raid. It was pure hell. It's hard to find words to compare it. You lie in your foxhole waiting for death, bombs exploding all around, the ground shaking, and you shaking with it. I was terrified and wanted to run from that inferno, but I was a platoon commander and had to stay with my men. Besanov 39. Farther south, the Soviets struck at the vulnerable spearhead of the 4th Panzer Army. The 5th Guards Tank Army, supported by the 5th Guards Army, was ordered to destroy German armor near Prokhorovka, break through their lines, and advance 30 kilometers beyond. Through fake radio traffic and deceptive troop movements, the Soviets tricked the Germans into believing that two more Soviet armies were massing west of their position, a ruse designed to sow confusion. The battle was so crucial that Stalin sent Marshal Vasilevsky himself to oversee it. But when Vasilevsky discovered that German units had advanced farther than expected, he panicked and ordered the attack to begin early on the morning of July 12th. The hasty offensive caught the Red Army unprepared. When the 5th Guards Tank Army slammed into the 2 SS Panzer Corps, chaos erupted. German intelligence had failed to anticipate the assault, leaving SS troops like Erhard Kursk completely stunned. We were all sleeping when they came at us. Planes overhead, endless tanks with infantry riding on them. It was hell. They were around us, above us, among us. We fought man to man, leaping from our foxholes, jumping onto vehicles, taking on all comers. It was hell! Gers. Despite the initial shock, the Germans regrouped quickly and inflicted devastating losses. The SS formations not only held their ground but destroyed 382 Soviet tanks and assault guns, 227 of them completely wiped out. The Soviets, in turn, managed to knock out only a dozen German tanks, just 4 of which were total losses. These figures sharply contradict later Soviet claims portraying Prokhorovka as a great Red Army victory. For the Germans, it was at best a limited tactical success, but the larger strategic picture still favored the Soviets. The Red Army, though bloodied, maintained the initiative. However, their heavy losses forced them to delay the next phase of their counteroffensive for 3 weeks. On August 3rd, they were finally ready to launch the final stage of the Battle of Kursk, Operation Rumyantsev. 7 Soviet armies, including 2 tank armies, attacked along the southern face of the salient. Within days, 3 more armies joined in, a combined force of 1 million men and 2,440 tanks and self-propelled guns. Opposing them were the depleted 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf, reduced to 210,000 men and 640 tanks and assault guns, of which only 270 were operational. The Soviet assault shattered the German line north of Kharkiv, driving deep toward the southwest. German units facing encirclement withdrew in haste. On August 5th, Soviet troops liberated Belgorod and Oryol, marking the first time since the start of the Great Patriotic War that the Red Army had decisively defeated the Wehrmacht in a major summer campaign. That night, Moscow erupted in celebration. Red Army guns fired a grand 124-cannon salute to commemorate the twin victories. By August 7th, General Katakov's 1st Tank Army had reached Bogodukov, just 50 kilometers from Kharkiv and nearly behind the retreating German forces. The German High Command rushes panzer divisions from other sectors to the threatened area and succeeds in halting the Soviet armored spearhead. Over the following days, both sides pour in more and more reinforcements, turning the engagement into yet another massive tank battle. In desperation, the Germans even strip units from the defenses of Kharkiv, despite Hitler's orders to hold the city at any cost, to contain this dangerous Soviet thrust. Meanwhile, the Red Army aims to push further southwest toward Poltava, a vital communications and supply hub for Germany's Army Group South. On August 11th, the Soviets open a new offensive, this time spearheaded by the fresh 1st Guards Army of the Southwest Front. Their objective is to encircle Kharkiv from the south. Army Detachment Kempf now finds itself threatened on 3 sides, making the defense of the city increasingly untenable. While the Germans manage to halt the Voronezh front west of Kharkiv, the steppe and southwest fronts close in steadily. By August 18th, Hitler finally concedes that the situation is hopeless and that further defense risks another Stalingrad. He authorizes Manstein to withdraw if necessary. That same day, the German retreat from the Oryol sector is completed, officially ending Operation Kutuzov. As Soviet forces tighten their grip around Kharkiv, the Wehrmacht evacuates the city. During the night of August 22-23, the 50-day struggle known as the Battle of Kursk has come to an end. The Battle of Kursk stands as the largest engagement of the Second World War and one of the bloodiest in recorded history. Historians still debate the Red Army's true losses, which will likely never be precisely known. It's estimated that at least 1.2 million Soviet soldiers were killed or wounded, 7,000 tanks and assault guns destroyed, and 3,000 aircraft lost. German casualties reached around 203,000 killed, wounded, or missing, with 200 tanks and assault guns and 650 aircraft lost, Tuppel 154. Despite the Soviets suffering much heavier losses and failing to meet all their operational goals, Kursk was a decisive German defeat. Their hesitation to launch the offensive, their underestimation of Soviet strength, poor intelligence, and lack of reserves all combined to doom the operation. None of Germany's original objectives were achieved. The Red Army formations within the Kursk salient were not destroyed. The Soviets were not weakened enough to prevent their own offensive. The front was not shortened to free up reserves, and the mass of Soviet prisoners the Germans had planned to exploit as forced labor never materialized. Hitler had hoped a victory at Kursk would restore faith in German invincibility, but the outcome proved the opposite. For the first time, a German summer offensive was stopped cold within days, and the Red Army, despite its immense casualties, seized the initiative along the entire Eastern Front. By late summer 1943, German combat strength in the East was exhausted and their losses could no longer be replaced. The repercussions went far beyond the battlefield. In early 1943, many Germans still believed victory over the Soviet Union was possible. After Kursk, morale began to crumble. The Wehrmacht's behavior toward civilians also hardened. Until then, some officers had tried to maintain workable relations with local populations, recognizing their importance for sustaining control. But after Kursk, attitudes grew even more brutal. As German troops retreated from Ukraine later that year, civilians were often given a grim choice: march west with the army or be executed on the spot. In every sense, Kursk was a turning point in the Second World War, militarily, strategically, and for millions of civilians still trapped under German occupation. For them, the suffering was far from over. Following their 1943 counteroffensives, the Red Army advanced more than 1,000 miles westward, until by spring 1945 they stood at the gates of Berlin, the ultimate prize. The Battle of Berlin, though smaller in scale, rivaled Kursk in intensity and bloodshed, yet remains underrepresented in historical documentaries. That's why we created 16 Days in Berlin, a comprehensive 412-hour series chronicling the battle day by day across 18 episodes. It features detailed maps and animations, archival footage and expert commentary from David Willey of the Tank Museum. And Ian from Forgotten Weapons. We couldn't release this unfiltered portrayal of the Second World Wars. Final carnage on YouTube. It would be demonetized instantly. Instead, you can watch 16 Days in Berlin on Nebula, our independent streaming platform where creators aren't restricted by advertising policies. Visit nebulatv.realtimehistory to sign up for just $30 a year and gain access to 16 Days in Berlin, as well as our Nebula exclusive series Rhineland 45 and Red Atoms, along with all our videos, ad-free and early. Your subscription also includes access to exclusive classes from Nebula creators. In our newest course, I take you behind the scenes of Real-Time History's production process, showing exactly how we craft a high-quality history documentary from start to finish. Once again, that's nebula.tv Real-Time History, only $30 a year, supporting us directly as we continue to make in-depth, evidence-based history content. We would like to thank Dr. Roman Tuppel for his invaluable input on this video. Dr. Tuppel is one of the foremost experts on the Battle of Kursk, and I highly recommend his book, Kursk, 1943, The Greatest Battle of the Second World War, available in multiple languages, including German, French, and Spanish. You can find all source references in the video description below. For another deep dive into a major German defeat, check out our documentary on the Battle of the Bulge. And if you're watching this on Patreon or Nebula, thank you. Your support makes this possible. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this has been a Real-Time History production, the only history channel that appreciates the irony of a communist army offensive named after a Tsarist general, Kutuzov.